Okay, I'm going to talk a little philosophy tonight. So, I'm going to kind of compare two different perspectives, two different mindsets that you can go about living your life. And these two mindsets are kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum, okay? And you can fall anywhere on the spectrum in reality. So, let's start with one side of the spectrum, okay? This side of the spectrum is the one that looks at the world and you look at the world as hostile, right? And perhaps the world is hostile, right? You see all of this pain, this suffering, all of this war, and that's just oftentimes that's just things that humans inflict on each other. That's not even getting into what the environment inflicts upon us, right? So when you look at the world in this way, you are in a fearful mindset, right? You fear that hostility, and the result of that fear is that you're going to try to protect yourself. You're going to try to protect your individual self at the expense of the world, right? And when you're on this side of the spectrum, really far on this side, what ends up happening is you fall into these vicious cycles of greed, right? You collect tons of excess resources, and because you live in a first world country, you don't quite see that the cost of those excess resources is scarcity elsewhere, right? So if third world countries are manufacturing a lot of the products you buy, but you don't see it, then what's happening is you're creating more scarcity and you're justifying your excess because of your fear of scarcity. So ultimately, the result of this mindset is that you are creating more fear for yourself by justifying the greedy behaviors. By prioritizing your individual self at the expense of the world, you are you're creating more fear. Now, the thing about this perspective is it might work in the short term, okay? You may diminish your fears in the short term. You may protect yourself in the short term. But in the long term, this mindset is guaranteed to fail. It's guaranteed to fail if everyone is fostering this mindset because the scarcity that it brings and the fear is going to create violence. Okay, when people don't have their needs being met, they get violent. So, what's the other side of the spectrum? Well, the other side of the spectrum is, oddly enough, also driven by fear. But the difference is that it's driven by a long term perspective of fear. So instead of trying to insulate yourself from that hostility moment to moment, you're thinking more long term, okay? And what that might look like is instead of prioritizing individual, you foster a mindset that prioritizes the world. And in doing so, you do so because you know that by prioritizing the world, you're going to prioritize yourself. It's going to pay back in spades over time, right? And that's why this is the long-term perspective. And in my personal opinion, this is this is kind of the epitome of critical thinking. If you can understand that your actions affect yourself through others, you've kind of reached the peak of what critical thinking has to offer. And what that means is that you've become empathetic with the other people in the world. And that empathy ultimately drives you to seek to solve other people's problems so that their problems don't become your problems, right? And that's kind of this short versus long term perspective I'm talking about. If you are constantly if you're constantly trying to protect yourself at the expense of the world, then you're going to foster long term problems. And maybe you hedge your bets. Maybe you hope that the shit doesn't hit the fan before you are long gone, right? But you ultimately have to ask yourself is what if you're wrong? And beyond that, what are you leaving behind for your children or your grandchildren, right? Now, you could also say, oh, I don't have grandchildren. I'm not going to have children, right? And okay, sure, that's fine. But is that really the life you want to lead? Do you want to live in a world where you feel unsafe to have children? I don't think that's really a good outlook. So we foster a lot of competition between humans when we take this individualistic perspective rather than addressing the collective problems first. We think we're being smart by helping ourselves first, and you got to help yourself first to an extent, right? You have to fulfill your basic needs, but you also have to question exactly what those needs are. You can't sit here and say you need a bigger house, you need a new car every 2 years, you need this and that, you need tons of new consumer goods. You're falling into a materialistic lifestyle because that's the way you've been conditioned. You can't keep justifying that at the expense of other people's needs. And if you do, again, you're starting to foster those long-term problems. And we don't want to do that. This is why I said the peak of critical thinking is understanding how your actions affect yourself through others. Now, it's almost like this. There's this concept in video games called PvP and PvE. What that means is player versus player and player versus environment. Ultimately, player versus environment can be framed as player versus environment and player, right? So if you're against your environment, you're in the real world, it means you're against nature and other people, right? But the point I'm trying to make here with this analogy is that we want to diminish the player versus player. Okay, we want to make our entire world player versus environment. We want every single human being on this planet on the same team, and we want them competing against the environment in order to not necessarily defeat it, but to live with it in harmony. And the more we distract ourselves with player versus player, the more we distract ourselves with these wars, right, with all this tension between humans, the less prepared we are to fight climate change, right? The less prepared we are to fight all of the natural disasters that come upon us. So the point here is that we again, we want to foster that player versus environment perspective rather than human versus human. It doesn't do us any good to be fighting ourselves. If you look at, I don't know, say you look at the deer, take one species. Are those deer competing with each other? Well, you could say they're competing for food. You can say they're competing for space. But in general, not really, right? There's a lot of food to go around if we are smart about the distribution, right? And because of our intelligence, because we are conscious, we can be pretty damn good at distribution of resources if we consciously try to do so. But if we're constantly fighting each other, we're not so good at distributing those resources. So it ultimately comes down to ego, right? On one side of this spectrum, ego is really high, and on the other side of the spectrum, it's not that ego is low, but it's almost just a different outlook at ego. It's like you want to protect yourself, but again, that epitome of critical thinking is understanding how your actions affect yourself through others. And you're protecting yourself by protecting the world. By prioritizing the world's needs, you're making the world a better place for yourself as well. It's not like you're giving up your own desires. That's not how it works in reality. Now, you may think it works like that because you may think that materialism is going to make you happy, but how many people out there are happy because they're billionaires? They're not happy because they're billionaires. They're not happy because they have a bunch of mansions and cars. They're happy because their needs are being met and they can kind of enjoy life past that. But a lot of those people are stressed out, and maybe they don't know why they're stressed out. Because they think, I did everything right? I'm retired, I have a bunch of money in my bank account, I can take care of myself, but they're still not happy. And the reason they're not happy is very likely because other people aren't happy, and they see that unhappiness, and they feed off of it. They are ultimately empathetic, and maybe they don't even know that they're empathetic. Maybe they don't know that the reason they're unhappy is because other people aren't happy. But when other people are unhappy, it creates stress, it creates violence, and that violence feeds back into you, whether you are wealthy or not, right? So if we think about this ego concept, I'm gonna give you a little, not an analogy, but we Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, right? And we credit Thomas Edison. Maybe we give him a patent and we give him riches, right? We credit him for the invention of this light bulb, this great invention that transformed humanity. So here's the problem with that. If we give Thomas Edison all the credit for inventing the light bulb, what that is really doing is it's discrediting all of the cumulative advancements, all of the failures, the trial and error that everyone before him played a part in. So he was just kind of the breakthrough in this. That he was just the one that made the breakthrough discovery, but he was playing off of the backs of all of the past civilizations throughout history, right? We make all of these cumulative technological advancements, and then someone comes along and makes a breakthrough discovery, and we give them all the credit. It's not really, doesn't make any sense, right? What we're doing is, that's our ego speaking. Our ego is giving Thomas Edison all the credit because ultimately we are scared, right? We're fearful, we're trying to protect ourselves, and by saying that, oh, Thomas Edison can do this, therefore I can do it, and therefore I can get these riches and protect myself. Again, that's the ego speaking. If we look at it more objectively, we can see that Thomas Edison just played one very small part. It's almost like 1,000 people spent thousands of years building a puzzle, and Thomas Edison put the last piece in the puzzle. That's the perspective I'm trying to give you here. It's that if you allow your ego to think you are a badass because you made some breakthrough discovery, or because you are because you happen to be wealthy, you happen to be successful, what you're not realizing is that the people that made you, the reason you're wealthy is because a bunch of other people helped you produce goods and services and sell them. You may be the business owner, you may be the one that initially invested the capital, but without all your employees, you would not be successful. It takes everyone in that entire cycle, it takes everyone in a company to create a good or service. If you take any single person out, that good or service would not have been created. And that's the point here. It's like everyone's putting pieces into this puzzle, and just because you're the one that puts the last piece in the puzzle, or perhaps you're the one that started the puzzle, it doesn't mean you should be entitled to to reap all, like, most of the rewards from that puzzle, right? From the completion of that puzzle. In reality, if you think about it from that long-term perspective, where you are attempting to help the world, and by extension help yourself, then you will diminish those long-term problems. And that's just kind of a concept I wanted to get out in a YouTube video here, because it's really important to understand that we like to think highly of ourselves. It's a tendency that is born out of fear. But if you think about fear in a different way, and you think about the long-term implications of that, of too much of an egoic mindset, then you can escape that egoic mindset. You can escape those long-term consequences, and together we can foster a better world. And I don't know if it was Neil Peart or Geddy Lee who said this. I don't know who wrote the song lyrics, but it says, what's the lyric? And the men who hold high places must be the ones who start to mold a new reality closer to the heart. So what that means to me is that if you're privileged, you have the responsibility to mold that new reality. You have the obligation to. And you have to really look at your circumstances and decide if you are the one holding that high place. Personally, I hold a pretty high place. I'm not super wealthy or anything, but my needs are met and beyond, and I have a responsibility to help the people in lower places. Because the truth is those people in lower places, they're not going to be the one to mold the new reality, at least not peacefully, because they're struggling more than the people in high places are. It requires the people in the high places to take the first step. It requires the people in the high places to turn the cheek. And if you were to make that analogy over to the Israel-Palestine conflict, what you would see is that Israel they kind of oppressed the Gaza Strip, right? The Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and Israel are the people in the high place, right? And it's their job to take the first step at brokering this peace deal. They're the ones that need to make the sacrifice, and they're the ones that need to forgive first, because if they don't, there's no reality where the people in the lower place forgive first, because it's much harder for them to do so. Again, and the men who hold high places must be the ones who start to mold a new reality closer to the heart. That song's called "Closer to the Heart." It's by Rush, and it's that statement it's been drilling in my head lately. I've been thinking about it more and more, and it's like, yeah, it's really true. You have to be, if you're the person in the high place, you have to be the one to take the steps to make the world a better place. You can't wait for other people in lower places to do it for you. And you have to, if you're in a first world country, it's time we get together and help all these third world countries that we have been oppressing. And if you don't know we've been oppressing these third world countries, if you've been excusing it or you've been justifying it, you got to check your ego. You have to think about what's actually happening. And I know that life can be hard in a first world country. I know that you can relativize the pain, and I know that your pain's real, trust me. But if you are a person listening to this, and you are strong, and you are in a place to help people, you need to do it. Whether it's whatever it may be, you can talk to people, you can donate money, you can I don't know, go and volunteer if you want. But above all, just be kind. That's the number one thing. Don't attack people verbally. Don't use ad hominems. Don't use condescending language. That in itself, just being kind to people, will go farther than you could ever imagine. You don't even have to give up your hard-earned money. If what you do, if all you do is remove the hate from your heart, that'll be enough. Thanks for watching.